Так, всім ще раз привіт.
So greetings to everyone. It's already my turn to be here, and I'm really happy that I will be able to talk with you from the stage. I will invite three curators, artists. This is Kateryna Iakovlenko, Natalia Matsenko, and Lia Dostlieva. So I am inviting the panelists. Please, a round of applause to the great ladies. So, in fact, we did some prior discussion of the questions before the panel, but I would like to start that those who haven't been following our panelists on social media, you should start doing it because they are very impactful. So our today's topic, it's written somewhere there. This is global framework of how the Ukrainian cultural recovery will look like, how the recovery of Ukraine will look like, including the culture, and it's all about future. And it's a topic that can encompass a lot of things. That's why I will start with the fact that art, it's not a menu, and it's ChatGPT. Art does not perform a particular function, doesn't have to respond to any needs, but it does perform a huge number of social functions. So what I wanted to ask you, whether the art should reflect the current reality, or maybe it should look aside and try to distract us. And the question that follows, is there an art that today, currently, can be non-relevant? So who would like to start? Miss Natalia, maybe you? Thank you, Hnat. Thank you to all who are present here. Special thanks for promotion. I wanted Lia to start as an artist, but I will try to start to begin. First of all, I think that our current discussion is a good continuation of the previous discussion. There were a lot of things already mentioned today, and the topic of being relevant, or art being relevant or non-relevant, has been raised as well. Coming back to this citation from Nikita, I would like to say, from the viewpoint of the function, I would agree that art is not a menu or a ChatGPT, but on the other hand, I think that the biggest advantage of the art as a tool is that not everything can be art, but art can be anything. It can be a menu and ChatGPT, because it can exist in multiple forms and shapes. And if we talk about its function, this multifunctionality, in my opinion, is one of the distinguishing features of art as a tool which we often favor in comparison to others, especially in complicated situations which cannot be interpreted in a simple way, and art becomes this space that was already mentioned, that art is a space. It can be a kind of safe space that in which we can play certain models of a real life. And actually, from this perspective, I wouldn't use the categories of relevance or non-relevance, because in this space, everything is relevant. If we have a look from the specific viewpoint during the war, for example, we have the topic of censure, self-censure, ethical issues, and so on. From this viewpoint, we can say, well, it looks doubtful from the ethical viewpoint, but this is, again, it's very relevant. But in my opinion, art is great because it cannot be boiled down to only one function. It cannot be boiled down to only one definition. Can I be heard? I'm really happy to be here. Thank you for the invitation. It's a great honor and privilege to be among the curators of the Assembly of 2022 and then meet you at the workshop in Warsaw. And now I'm here. Thank you. Thank you so much. It's a real privilege. Coming back to your question. When it comes to culture and arts of the wartime, they have specific features. There are new trends. For example, I will talk about from the perspective of a person who lives beyond Ukraine for many years. I would say that if after 2022 there were certain processes in cultural and arts field, what happened? There was a certain instrumentalization of culture and art. I mean, it's not something bad, it's just a feature. So art and culture can be a tool, an instrument to achieve something. Since 2022, we could see that art became a tool of documenting a lot of things because artists initiated documentation, they started having diaries and so on. Yeah, I'm sure you know even better than me. Also, this is a tool for archiving, but also for promotion of certain narratives and advocacy of certain narratives, especially in the West. If we look at the exhibition about modernism even, we still say that we have art and culture before 2022, but now, only now, you have found Ukraine on your map. And most probably you thought the artists were Russians before, but they are not. So in any way, we used to talk about war in this context, but a lot of from cultural activists received the new functions, new authority of this additional advocacy of Ukraine abroad. So we stopped developing our personal careers. I'm still doing my career. This is my part of professional activity. But on the other hand, we started to demonstrate Ukraine abroad. And certain narratives didn't work. We used, for example, cancel Russian culture, failed not due to our fault, but due to unpreparedness of the West to admit that they can be wrong in something. But starting since 2022, 3 years after, we have been explaining it, and we have been doing advocacy for Ukraine. Now you come, you say you are from Ukraine, and the Western audience has this feeling that they know everything about you, what happened to you, where you came from, and what you are going to talk about. This is a kind of wrong, false recognition. This is like the result of this high media coverage. That's the point. And another thing, we are expected to talk about the war, and people expect it so much. I'm not going to give you details because I often participate in certain discussions and jury and events. Sometimes I am curating things, and some colleagues, we reviewed application. It was an application from a person who didn't indicate where the person was from. So the last name was post-Soviet. We realized why the person didn't indicate their name, and it turned out to be true, but the colleague mentioned this can't be the person from Ukraine because this person's works are not about the war. So this is the situation when the culture and art became tools, instruments. So what shall we do with this? This is already a next issue. I will stop talking this point. I will hand over to Katya. Thank you for being the last. I thought that I would have enough food for thought because there are a lot of related thoughts, and sometimes they are different and sometimes they are opposite to each other. But I will share a few points. The key point is that I don't like the function of the art. How to explain? There should be some art that has certain functions, social importance, and so on. we have this function being performed by art, but do different kinds of art lack this function? I don't think so. So in my opinion, every time when I see social media and talk with people, I realize that a lot of different kinds of art exist, but the issue is that you might not see these different worlds because they are somehow parallel in undergoing different processes. Now it is happening because we don't have developed infrastructure. These different kinds of arts can cross. They cooperate, but not all art that is being created now in Ukraine and beyond it is about the war. And I think it should be highlighted because I understand that some of the artists can feel this difficult and impossibility to talk about it on the one hand, and on the other hand, they are forced to talk about it. And that's why, as a result, we have a strange request and need for creating something that you wouldn't want to create. And this request, this expectation also depends on the context, where the person is located, whether it's here or abroad, whether a project is within the framework of the residency or just like that. I think it's also important to look how this infrastructure functions. But also, I would like to be a bit skeptical. It doesn't mean that I'm always like that, but just today I thought that I need to voice some special thoughts. But when talking about the war from 2014 and remembering all these talks about archives, about how they are important and how they have to be maintained and preserved, citing the group Rutkovsky, Rachinsky, we fucked it up. We don't have these archives, even from 2014. All these discussions that discussed how decolonization was important, how to work with Soviet Union heritage, even the participants don't remember what it was about. And this is a good reflection that we ended up at the same point. We have a different traumas and tragedies. The less amount of people have stayed in this discussion. We have new people joining us, and we started talking about the same. So I wouldn't want to talk about the function, but I would like to highlight that art is absolutely necessary, and its different forms are absolutely necessary. And even if you do not understand why it exists, but if it does exist, it's great because it means that people can express their thoughts. And that's why we need the space to have it. And it means that infrastructure is available for it. So for me, it's a very broad question. And at this, I will take a pause. So keep the mic, but it's about not forgetting. It's not about ending up at the same point in 10 years. So a lot of tools, the one that is connected with what has written, the way it works in economics, we have strategies, plans, performance plans, and so on, where you record and document, and there is logic. In culture, and Volodya will confirm, when it comes to cultural recovery plans popping up from time to time and other initiatives, but in practice, this is my question. How would you assess? Do you think these things can work at the level of the state strategies? But in practice, they do not often work out. But it's about grassroots initiatives. That's why we always come back to the points where we start, because it all starts from the beginning. But we can actually conclude, if these are not state initiatives, can we coordinate our grassroots initiatives better? So do you believe in developing state strategies? If so, how they should look like? And the second question is how to coordinate better the grassroots initiatives. If to talk about different points, I was thinking how to respond to this very complicated question about the future, what art should look like after the war. if we start to fantasize and imagine things, of course, that starting in 2022, we have been talking a lot about futurism, museums, and how to develop them. But since the time passed, what I can track, these projects, support programs that existed abroad before, they are already experiencing cuts or are over, and the arts are facing different challenges, starting from funding issues because they don't have a job to live on. There is also a need to pay for the workshop if they have one and it's functional. Secondly, you just have to shift to survival mode. Another element is when we talk about jobs, works, whether our works are purchased or not, if they stay. If these works were created in 2022, we talked about their vulnerability, how it's the question of how to keep them and preserve them. If we have a several collection of certain works, let's say made up of paper and trash, it doesn't mean that it have to be kept like this. We have to invest more in order to preserve the condition it is now. So there is another layer to it. And thirdly, there are psychological issues. Kateryna Iakovlenko mentioned about it in their text for the secondary archive. She mentioned that when in 2015 she did a work about the relocation, she didn't want to do it, but still she managed to express herself. And then afterwards her trauma exacerbated and she didn't know how to deal with it. And now we understand that we have artists that are living with this trauma, and a lot of them are internally displaced people and migrants, and they met the war when they were teenagers. It means that half of their life they have been experiencing the war, and this is what they should talk about, how they should practice art, whether they have their personal spot within this situation. But Lia, I think, will talk more about how to be an artist abroad, because there were different periods of when a person ends up abroad and how well they are incorporated in the local context or Ukrainian context. These are all things that are obviously have to be talked through and thought through. Of course, we need some strategies. And here, as a radical speaker, I would like to highlight that we need social programs for artists, starting from thoughts how they should be engaged and where they should work, and to more complicated issues, how to form, shape their collections, because the state collections will not exist only on donations. So we need a strategy so that a museum can present their work in the post-war period. And also, this will give us an opportunity to develop further intellectually, from the intellectual viewpoint, because apart from materials, it's an ability to talk, but when it's think, but when you are focused on only survival and psychological needs, it is more complicated to think about more worldview related things. When we have a state, they don't view a strategy from the viewpoint of social care. So the typical practice is that they view it from the viewpoint of investment. So the state invests in this to get this, and it's a dominating discourse, not only in the Ukrainian context, but if you talk about the state, how they imagine the vector of development, it's not about social security. But as futurists, we can imagine that the strategy can include that the arts and culture become the basic value in Ukraine. And in order to have that, we need to achieve this or that. Also, to talk about the grassroots initiatives, it will never substitute institutional initiatives. And if we talk about apartment galleries, they will exist, but Artitrans space is not an institution dealing with the art that is developing or the artists that already have certain experience. These are just different functions. We have a very nice company, and I'm sure that we will agree with each other. And I will just get built on what Katya mentioned. I think that yes, definitely there should be a state strategy and grassroots initiative, and this is a very urgent question. The way how these two parties can cooperate. There are a lot of discussions about the recovery through culture, reconstruction, and so on. They are being done through this future perspective. This is logical, and we are talking a lot about future, and we are futurists, and we are optimists, at least a part of us, and we really hope that the future will be for us, and that we will have this question of recovery after the war. And there'll be new opportunities which are not possible now, but it's important to know that all these strategies and plans for the future are something not to be planned, but this is something that has to be implemented already now, but it has to be done already yesterday and 2 days ago. So if you talk about state strategy and cooperation between the state and grassroots initiatives, and this problem with institution has existed not since 2022 or 2014. So to a certain extent, independent Ukraine existed on the ruins because we became independent in this international field on the ruins of the Soviet Union and the remnants of the Soviet communist institutions, as a part of which stopped working or stopped existing altogether. Some of them maintained, and they continued to exist in our democratic society. And these questions that become so urgent during the war, they were topical in the past as well. So now we are working in this extreme mode, and we are compensating for all these missed opportunities from the past. And now we have to compensate for this past. We have to work with the current situation, with this insecurity, lack of safety, lack of resources, including the time, resources, human resources, and it all has to take place simultaneously. So what is typical for recovery of Ukraine now, including cultural recovery, this is this simultaneousness of all processes, and this strategy has to be formed on the go right now, but at the same time we understand that we cannot have these urgent decisions all the time. We need to start thinking strategically, and we have a lot of great grassroots initiatives, but regardless of all the attempts from the state to give first steps, to take first steps, I think this has not been successful enough. I think we have to work more efficiently and combine these aspects. And if we talk about the work abroad and about cultural diplomacy, I think that based on my experience, because this is a great part of my work. So a lot of successful cases, very few things these cases are very not related to the ministry. They're all related to some lack of planning and so on. And this is something that has to be changed, because regardless of our artists being great, or our cultural managers being great, or grassroots initiatives being great, without the state initiative, is not going to work the way it should be. And in particular, on the level of the international cooperation, I heard from the colleagues in the Czech Republic that at the beginning of the full-scale invasion, Muzej Volomuci wanted to help and admit the collection from a museum. Since they didn't have direct connections with Ukraine, they addressed the Ministry of Culture, but they never received a response. And this is a very typical situation. This is not something unique. And I hope that at a certain point that the Ministry of Culture will start responding to emails in English that they will start getting from partners, and they will be building a better dialogue with those who are inside the country and who are taking the initiative. When it comes to recovery, presently, I've already mentioned that a lot of strategies, those that we can see in the world using the current models, they are based on the experience of the Second World War. So we usually have this addition like pre-war, war, post-war, and so on. And they are already based on the experience of wars in the new age, but of a smaller scale. In this case, Ukrainian experience accumulates a lot of existing experience. On the other hand, it's unique because the war of such a scale, this current war during which reconstruction is already taking place, we can use the already existing algorithms from all over the world. We have a lot of useful life hacks, but on the other hand, we have to develop our own unique algorithms, which are unprecedented, and maybe someone else will be able to use them. Olha Honchar mentioned it today, that some might be forced to use our, to apply our contributions. You know, it's very difficult for me to talk because it seems that it's a positive, good thing when the speakers or moderators do not agree with each other. I think it's very useful. But I do agree with everything that you are saying. And actually, as it was already mentioned, these issues that we have now, they didn't appear in 2022. Of course, that the war added to challenges, but still, in general, everything that we have are the outcome of this post-colonial time, which we had in 1991, and this institutional weakness is one of the outcomes. And we can talk here for another 10 years how we need cooperation, how we need to involve Ministry of Culture, how they should respond to emails in English, but we will not be able to move on if they don't do it. So we can speak a lot, but there is actually a gap between this live culture and official institutions. We will be in this post-colonial state, and again mentioned that this is already the feature of our situation, that we are simultaneously in different states. We have decolonial, post-colonial states, but also we have anti-colonial war. So we are located in all of this at the same time. And people in the West are not ready to learn. They want to use their own guidebooks and they want to teach us. And I suspect that all these plans for reconstruction and recovery, they want us to have peace so that they can tell us that they taught us to live peacefully. And this is also a huge issue that someone has to deal with. The Europeans lack perspectives and knowledge. We had a perfect discussion in Germany. There was a German journalist asking questions, and among other questions, he asked, what do you want the Western audience to learn from your project about Ukraine? I am not an educational establishment. It's an arts project. I'm a bit tired to teach the Western audience. They have to take the first step and learn something. He listened to me, and then he said, then why do you do art after all? I, as an Ukrainian, it looks like I have to adjust my art to cater for their needs. and they have to give already prepared answers to the questions that they might have. It's also a big question. It also has to be a part of recovery. We are just the part of all these huge processes taking place at the same time. And there is like a corner of futurists. Maybe you have your vision how we can shift it from the talking space to the acting space. So we will continue, but the war is a period. This is like a zero stage. So the war, if to talk about positive things, it's a bit strange to say, but there is an opportunity to radically change the processes that have been working improperly for a long time. And within culture, I think that previously Soviet Union institutions worked from the viewpoint of distrust, and now the civil society has demonstrated that there should be trust, and even from the viewpoint of these strategies, the much smarter decision is to have a look at the grassroots initiatives, fund them, rather than move them within the plane of institutions. But if we need to reload, reboot something in culture, for example, we are saying that the Ministry of Culture is not flexible. We have an old framework of institutions, but what else do we need to enter this post-war future? What else can we reboot? What else do we have to change on a systemic level, Katya? I think that in 3 days we will not be able to change Ukrainian institutions. It's even took us more than 30 years, so I think we have to be patient. Because institutions, these are people who work there. It's very simple. Due to a huge lack of personnel, we understand that institutions face stupid problems, that there is no one to respond to emails. Of course, there can be automatic responses. There's a very simple example from my editing experience. When you have so many emails to your work email, and then they ask, why haven't you answered me? But if I started answering the emails, I would never leave my office in the evening. It's not only my problem, but it's the problem of many people. But even if there is a person who will be responsible for responding to emails, it doesn't mean the communication will be clear and that people will understand each other. I don't know how to answer your question, because it seems to me we have been combating so many problems at the same time. So with your one hand, you perform something, and then you do something else with your second hand and arm, and you have somehow to combine it. And whether it's worse, if you don't have time to achieve something, it's a big question for me and a big challenge. But I have personally decided with this dilemma, I have no solution. I'm just working. The question of emails is a technical question. It's more about funding these institutions and their real independence and the tasks that they have to perform. Mainly, they focus on programmatic tasks, but apart from that, are there any things in culture? So you mentioned a lot about social support of artists. We don't have the system. You talk about a lot about education for artists or cultural workers. So it looks like education is absent today. So any other issues? At the beginning, I forgot to mention when talking about social issues that the huge layer, these are artists coming from the front line with the fighting experience. And there's only one institution I'm aware of that they did a project. This is a range room. I think it's more a grassroots initiative because it's a small institution. So this is a gallery center in Ivano-Frankivsk. I don't know why they are doing it, but why isn't the state doing it? So do artists want to be included into certain projects? Typically, they say no, we don't. Whether it's true, I don't know, because a person with fighting experience often say, I don't want it, but in fact, they feel unnecessary and not involved in the community. That's why, as a community, we have to offer different options for them, how to socialize this person again, how to create conditions so this person feels needed again. And this feeling of loneliness altogether of the people that served in the army, of IDPs and migrants, it's very persisting, actually. And a lot of people think that it's only my own experience, I cannot share it, but actually we still need to create conditions under which this will become possible, just at least to listen to a person and give them the choice whether they need to do, whether they should integrate in the art community, or maybe they should choose something else, or maybe they want to co-develop with other veterans like themselves. And this opinion of what to do with this kind of a society, this is also important right now. Obviously, we can come up with a strategy of returning people of all categories, but as an artist community, we can come up with something only for this category of people. Thank you. To continue, I will build on what Katya has mentioned, but just to begin with this formulation of going back to zero. On the one hand, we cannot talk that all processes have been put to zero because a lot of things continue. But there is this coming back to zero to a certain extent, and we can also see it, trace it in art. I've just remembered the work of Katya Buchanska, which is called Black from Zero. And we have a play of words. We have a black cube, a black square, and from zero, meaning zero, this is like a front line that we call it. So it's like a modernist zero, and this is also about coming back to zero in art. And there is a reference to Malevich, and there is this absolute null zero. This is the front line. And this is something that makes us, reboots our reality. And just to continue what Katya said, if to talk about practical steps that are needed, in my opinion, in cultural sphere, this is inclusivity in the broadest meaning of its term. This is something that we have been lacking all the time. This is something we have to work at when it comes to people who have some difficulties to access exhibitions, or who have limitations to perceive art, like people with hearing or sight impediments. But the culture has also to become sensitive to what is comes up during the war. So we think that war is something inter-time, but the war is also the time, intensive time, when there are a lot of important cultural phenomena. And if to talk about the segment that we touched upon in our exhibition at Gem Factory, these are artists in the army. This is all often a painful combination, but still it's more about the impossibility to return into this art sphere, or coming back and starting everything from zero, from scratch. So when it comes to inclusion, I think we will have a lot of people, both veterans and those who suffered from the war physically and mentally. This is something that we have to take into account. Also, we have people who needed this inclusion prior to war. That's why we need also to create this friendly space. And this space has to be very sensitive to experience that we didn't have before. And from this perspective, I would like to promote something. Recently, we had a project in the center from neuro different artists. And this is a great sample of a grassroots initiatives that to some extent substitutes this what has to be taken care of by the state. They have some play of words. It's Atelier Normalno, okay. There is a play of words in the name of the project. So what to change? I don't know. First of all, I would like to keep this metaphor of going back to zero, to scratch, because coming back to the topic of our discussion, we have the word recovery. And it's a temporary, war is temporary status, and sometimes we think that after the war we will finally start living. But this will be the consequences of the processes that are taking place now. That's why to talk about these things makes sense only if we take the starting point, the beginning of the war. But it's also complicated because we have a war beginning in 2022 and 2014. These are different kinds of wars. That's why I think to talk about recovery or reconstruction, everything was mentioned already, and it seems to me that I just repeat what has been told by our smartest colleagues. But when it comes to changes, there is this practice of coexistence. It came up during the first discussions, but I think about it a lot. I would like to develop this thought. We have spent a lot of time to prove ourselves and the world that we are a political nation, that we are united by values. We don't say I'm Ukrainian because I was born here. We say I am Ukrainian because I feel to be Ukrainian, and we now have a big amount of people who moved abroad due to different reasons. Some of them moved because they wanted to avoid certain official procedures. They managed to be abroad and didn't come back. These people are already there. We can pretend that they are not Ukrainian artists, that we don't like them. We can really believe that we don't like them, but they do exist objectively as a part of this complicated process. They are in the West, and regardless of how much we would talk that maybe we don't like that they present Ukraine or use controversial narratives, it does exist. We can pretend it's not happening, but it does happen. These people do represent Ukraine. They are outside. From my experience, I can say that for me, it's easier to get access to institutions because I know everyone. But for Western institution, a person who has been staying there for many years will be more associated with Ukraine.
Це міг, але нам, на жаль, потрібно покинути це такий
міг, but still we have to leave the premises before the siren gets cancelled. If you need a shelter, it's in the space nearby. There is basement, and you can check also the exhibition. So aerate.
Я. Просто любов трохи виявляв.
A bit of cheering from our speaker. Right, so while everyone are joining up, I think we can continue our session. So I think we can proceed from where we stopped. For me, I feel some obvious things which I would like to change in our cultural area, and that will be a soft move to our next part. So that's about the fund distribution, because whenever we have the phase, whenever the state institutions have these fundings, and it very often entails a lot of responsibility, absence of flexibility in management, curator freedom, etc. So I think that very often the focus is shifted towards the grant money. It like makes sense on the one hand. On the other hand, it shouldn't be like this. So therefore, if I would be empowered to change something in culture after the war, or even right now, so that is what is connected with the state funding. State funding should be more flexible, and the institutions receiving those funds should have the proper level of freedom. Coming back to this term, funding, this is one of the things where I look at the Ukraine facility recovery plan. It's not a secret that every year the percentage of the expenses for the culture shrinks, unfortunately. And on a practical level, people who perceive culture as something of leisure or as an element of promoting something, they're asking, why do you need money for? You could do it by your own means. Why do we need to finance culture? And that's kind of simple question, but it's kind of the same question, like why the sky is blue. I mean, maybe Boris knows that. I don't have a clue. And yeah, Boris knows everyone. Yeah. But why do we need to increase the money for culture? But I'm sorry, Boris, sorry. All right. Yeah, we need, if we try to put it in the way so that it resonates with those who are here in the room, but also to those people who are just passing by this art center and do not pay attention to that. I may start? Yeah, okay. Unfortunately, yes, we were disconnected on the moment. I hope that we would start talking about some acute, but it didn't happen. Sorry. All right. Let's talk about money. I still think when we talk about the communication with the state institution, is not my area of expertise. Why do we need money for culture? People will come because they will have interest. Okay, let's put it in the other way. So if we start this conversation with the question that, yes, culture should have certain role in the reconstruction, let's talk about this role, because it seems to me that we are starting looking for some additional arguments why culture is important, but it is important in its essence. We don't need to find some other explanations, because whenever we start, like, culture is important because it is a part of reconstruction, or it can explain to people why the sky is blue. So why do we need to look for these additional functions, especially how they are explained right now? Yes, culture is important, is an inalienable part and the feature of the existence of some certain communities. If we say that we are communities, yeah, we have different features, peculiarities like language or several languages or other religious elements, but also we have this culture, and we see why it is important, especially when someone is taking it away from us, when artists are killed. I know intelligence is but some people say, Lev Tolstoy, our brother, he's a good artist. Why have I closed myself from the Russian culture, etc.? So And then you're asking, who out of Ukrainian authors do you know? They say, no one. And they say, no, that's a kind of a colonial erasal of those who are wanted to be promoted. They will be promoted. And those who need to be shut down, they will be shut down. So why culture is important? It is needed. And we do not have to put any labels on that. No, it just has to exist. That's the key thing, I think. And right now, we really are having this existential threat. So therefore, we need to put it forward in those categories. I hope it makes sense for you. Maybe you will add something. I'm horrified that today I'm just reiterating some simple things, and I agree with everything which is said, but I see no other way. I totally agree. I couldn't agree more, which was said by Lia. But how to make it possible? I mean, this understanding that of the culture that it is because it has to be, and we do not have to explain it to every person. Let's go back to another key thing as education, because I think that in this real time reality, we do not have to prove to somebody why culture is important. All of us are trying to do that. We are the advocates of culture whenever there is need. But still, the question of education is a key here as well, because without perceiving culture as an organic, essential part of the human being from the childhood, I think without this, we cannot shape the overall world picture of the worldview. And we do not come up with any explanation why it is important. So, coming back to the necessity of the explanation, I would use a metaphor, because I think that, metaphors really work quite good, especially when we have some real cases. So one of the metaphor I am into, and is quite popular, I mean, let's consider the metaphor of mushrooms. I have a practical example. I like that when I read one example of mushroom, which is mycelium, which is used to restore fundamental concrete cracks. So sometimes we just need to put this mushroom mycelium deep there in this deep cracks. So it fills these gaps. It's very strong material, and that's a kind of natural reinforcement with this concrete. And I think that's also the feature of culture, especially when we talk about the post-war period. Of course, we talk about society, about a lot of cracks in this society. Sometimes they are vivid, sometimes they are hidden, and therefore, very often we cannot come up with the right tools to talk this order. We do not have this scanner to find that. But I think culture and art has these peculiarities of mushroom mycelium to fill these gaps and fill these cracks. So apart from this, there are categories, particularly in Newcastle universities, which were developed, the my concrete concept. I mean, mycelium concrete concept. So where, with the adding of the natural ingredients, the bricks can be created of natural origin. So there is idea that concrete is not ecological due to its components. But again, we are moving towards ecology in all the senses, and therefore we also need to understand the methods, how we cooperate with one another, with institutions, with landscape, with environment, with people, not people. That's very deep story, and therefore without education, without drastic changes in the area, we would not make it. I do not have arguments about money, but there is an argument about mushroom and the sky. So there is a book published, Mushroom at the End of the World, and there is another book, some notes about the colors by another book that was published by the small publishing house. So yeah, maybe you will be interested in these two books, just backing up our conversation. So, and they will bridge and fill up these gaps. So money is the problem. I mean, this is something we really have in common. That's all from me. Yeah, I bought this book, the Ukrainian translation of The Mushroom at the End of the World. We discussed this book and about the publishing process during the war. Its speaking process is something which causes a smile, and it's not about money, what I'm going to say, but following the talking about the artists during the war, I come up with an example, one initiative from down to top. It's Timur Zakharov, electronic musician who used to work as the artillery guy, but he's also a translator. When he came back to Kyiv, he was able to do music and do translations. So by his own means, he published the book, David Berman book, Real Air, and that was his initiative, the first Ukrainian translation of this author. So that's a kind of precedent, which is the product of the military war reality culture. It was kind of a promotion and advertisement. Yes, you can order the book in Timur because it's a limited number of the books, so you can do it. Thank you for the answers. When I ask this question, I'm communicating with people who make decisions at the different levels in the country. So it's always the question about the balance, how you would like to go down, are you going to line up this level of dialogue, because there is always the question, we can live about Liechtenstein, we can do without culture. So very often there are some theses, and people say, no, we cannot do without this. So, but there is always this search for the pragmatic answer, which will not discredit and devalue some certain things which are very important. But again, but very often it is not important what you said, it's important what people heard. So for me, it's always a struggle how to put it in a correct fashion. And very often people say, why? Yeah, we can do without culture, but we cannot do without roads. They want to repair roads, etc. And very often, yes, it's important to bring to the table that it's right time to work with the culture. It's important to be pretty pragmatic on looking for the way out. When I used to be in the US, one American artist, auctionist, gave one comment that Ukrainian art during the latest 2 years is focused on the reflection on reality, and it does not construct a new one. So what do you think about the thesis? Or maybe art has to be more focused on the culture to reflect the reality, or it has to look straight forward, to have more helicopter view, maybe after the war is over or after a victory. So what art has to do with that, with the reality? I think it's a kind of illustration to my conversation in Venice, when you are just swamped with somebody's stereotypes and makes you not argue with that. So yeah, people conclude on some basis. Sometimes people do not understand the context. They just saw randomly 3 pieces and they make kind of understanding. And then they think that they know everything about you, about your country, about your concerns, etc. So yeah, it's more likely that there will be no conversation. And they very often say, when are you going to tackle this, and that problem? So it's not the level where you can build this or that conversation. I'm really interested. What did you answer? All right. For me, it would be interesting to understand what would you see, what would you answer. Art is not obliged to prove something to somebody. It's not about correct and not correct expressions. I'm not thinking about this, no. But the authors of some projects, of some messages, they have to be ready to some reaction towards what they express. Very often some controversial things pops up, especially in the space of Western institutions, where some things are some things are allowed which are totally inappropriate for me. For example, Russian curator will do some exhibitions, etc. And very often, so they have some traumatic geography. And so there are lots of people like that, but that's an exact there was the decolonial exhibition, which actually just reiterates colonial structure by decolonial methods. So this is what we face, and it would be good if we had a chance to create separate discourse, to create some things that could oppose such things. I also would like to talk with you about washing the floor. Honestly, from 2022, I have the feeling that I come and clean. Right now we are working with work when I just mop the floor all the time. Somebody, for example, there is some failure, and you show up and say, let's talk about this, let's talk this over. I'll let you know what I'm talking about. There was a game on this video. So sometimes we say why some expressions on some stages, they are inappropriate. And we were trying to talk about this. People were shocked, and the representatives of the institutions that was present there, it's such a shame that we had this. And I said, it's good that you feel ashamed, but you have people who have to do the work that you have to do, so it's your failure. So you're not to mop the floor, right? It's all about the level of institutions, how respectful it is. Of course, it's all about our resources that we have. I had the privilege to live in safety, but still it's about your time. And people say, let's talk about Soviet propaganda. Let's talk about your blind spot. Let's talk about something else. You come, you talk it over, and next time there will be Italian guy on the event, and they say, I have Russian friends, they're so good, and what we need to do is that. And I go like, why am I supposed to tackle this, your problem? So there is a feeling that you all the time to do the same thing. You are like in the same context. I don't know how to get out of this rat race. Maybe there will be something from our future. We will see. Maybe someone will give us a hint.
Oh, the corner of futurists, yeah. So we will finish with futurism, just our vision of the future regarding this statement that, yes, it's quite a typical situation when there is limited awareness, but it's understandable what is the precursor of that. I know how we are represented abroad, and the obvious outcome of the current situation is that these windows for Ukraine are open to talk about the war. So to some extent, there is no sense in blaming the people who have these stereotypes, because this is something that they see superficially. At least they are sometimes open to the dialogue and can ask questions. Some other can actually have their own templates of thinking. and they can compare that Russians have such a great culture, and here are Ukrainians who talk only about the war. So when I work with foreign partners, I have this idea that we have to talk about the war. We cannot but talk about it. This is indispensable part of the context, but we always have to talk about the broader context of the Ukrainian culture. It's a history, the modern Ukrainian culture, which is not only about the war and reflections about the war. And what's interesting, something that I track among the responses of the audience, they are surprised. When there was my first great experience of cultural diplomacy, it was unfolding in Skepsis then in Denmark, then it was in Brussels. And in Brussels, there were a lot of participants. There were diplomats, people from Europarlament and external affairs. They came and looked at the works. There was a segment dedicated to the war, but mainly it was about the exhibition talking about the landscape concept in Ukrainian art. So people were coming to you and they were saying, "Wow, you have so great works. We didn't know about it. Oh, you had Havrilenko in the 60s, or when they saw the work of Katya about the dinosaurs. For them, there was great surprise to see this great segment of the Ukrainian modern art and an earlier art that they weren't aware of. So when the projects continued, like from Japan to Mexico that we are preparing now, I'll always include this component. I'm always open to explanations, and we always conduct public events within the framework of exhibition, but it's good when the exhibition tells the audience when the war is not the only thing that we can talk about. It's just a small component that the reality pressurizes us into expressing. And again, coming back to colonialism and so on. So the corner of futurism, my colleague, there will be a pessimistic vision. I will reflect regarding the previous ideas when it comes to the talk with Russians, about Russians and the discourse. I think it's not going to change because I think there always be people who will come up to you and it won't matter for them what your response will be. Also, I think that there are different kinds of a perception when it comes to Ukraine, non-occupied territory, and when it's not a bit more distant to the front line, people say, yeah, we understand people from Kyiv and Lviv, and then they say, well, Donbass. And it's at this time, usually I want to have more discussions. Recently, I had a conversation with a journalist and a writer who is a pro-Ukrainian one. She's from the South America, and she read a lot about Ukraine, but she read something in Spanish in her native country. It's interesting what sources she used because she was really well informed. But after waking up in Kharkiv, after long attacks, she could only hear the air raid sirens. And after these sirens, she was saying, well, how can you live here? But I'm not used to it, and so on. At this point, I knew already that back in 2014, she had written about the Donetsk and Luhansk region, that was the willpower of people. But can you imagine those people who are from Donetsk and Luhansk regions who, starting in 2014, don't have their accommodation, moved to Irpin, Bucha, lost their house, and then decided that it's time to fight with Russians? Oh my gosh, and do they keep talking Russian? And I was saying yes. And she experienced a kind of collapse. But how is it possible that they keep speaking Russian? And I understand there can be a lot of issues like this, why people switch to Ukrainian or not, whether they move abroad or not. So there are a lot of things like that. And so we need also a kind of guide with the prepared possible answers. But I think that these questions are caused by the context of these countries and their past and their connections with the Soviet Union, with Russia, with their own historical past that was connected either to fascist context or any other. These things should be considered. Of course, I cannot sing a song, Korhanya Hrahate. Okay, different citations of the songs, people will not understand it because this is not advantages for them, because business, economics, state, they are built on these connections that are maintained, and a lot of people are waiting when we will make peace with Russia. Maybe it will happen in some time. I can see on the news that when the conversations come up with about Greek art that comes back to Greece and so on. These are all problematic issues for Europe and the US. We cannot expect that the history of the Russian war in Ukraine will become a case that will speed things up. Well, we'll be just talking with them. If I can just add, when it comes to arts, which we need, recently there was a personal exhibition of Svetlichny in Białystok, where he combined his experience of working within military context, the explosions, mathematics and biology. He's a professor of biochemistry. I'm not sure, but I was really inspired that he was doing it. And even though he didn't really have time, he did this great exhibition in Białystok, and this is a sample of the future, a positive futurism for me. So if people find time, how neurons respond in all this military context, then maybe our art is not really bad, but we just need time and money. That's it. I would like to continue with the futurism optimistic vision. I just remembered it was the last element of your question, what to do after the victory. And I wanted to add in brief, it's about the topic we fucked up, and when we have optimistic scenario and we have a proper victory, this is the return of Crimea to Ukraine. So the first thing that I would want to do, this is to establish my own residency in the Crimea. I planned it long ago, 10 years ago, before the Crimean annexion, but I didn't have time. And also the landscapes that we worked with are not accessible due to constant attacks, but it would be great to return to Crimea and have this residency, because before this annexation, we had this feeling of cultural vacuum. It's not about the lack of or absence of the Ukrainian culture. It's not about identity. There was just lack of culture. And we realized that these processes are where we fucked up, and we wanted to compensate for it. And as a part of cultural diplomacy, in many of Western colleagues. I invited them to this residency as soon as we can manage it, because one of the stereotypes is about that it's very cold in Ukraine. What can you expect? Can you expect them to to know about art if they don't even understand in which part of Europe we are located, what climate we have? And when I demonstrate the Crimean photos, this is Mediterranean Ukrainian paradise that they do not suspect of. So I always invite them, come to us, and you will not be only surprised by that. Thank you. At this point, our panel of controversial optimistic futurism is over. Those who would like to ask questions, you will be able to do it during dinner time. And right now, please, a round of applause for the panelists. And we are going to do the rotation. We will not be able to change the glasses, but we would like to invite Yuri, Yulia, Polina, and Evgenia. I will take an additional chair.